Physiology of salivary secretion. Lectures overview. At the end of the lecture, the students should be able to understand salivary glands, types of the salivary gland, histology and innervation, composition of saliva, mechanism of secretion of the saliva, functions of saliva, controls of saliva and various applied aspects related to it. At the end of the lecture, I will give you some MCQs for self-assessment. So let us continue. There are three pairs of salivary glands: sublingual, submandibular and parotid glands. This is the parotid gland, this is submandibular gland, and just below the floor of the mouth sublingual gland is present. These are the main three pairs of the salivary gland. Some other minor salivary glands they are also present on the mucosa of the oral cavity, pharyngeal outlets and in the buccal mucosa. Parotid gland, it is a serous gland and it secretes saliva which is rich in water and electrolytes. It opens opposite to the second molar tooth with the Stensen's duct. This is sublingual gland. Sublingual gland, it is a mucous gland and it is situated in the floor of the mouth. It drains in mouth by duct of Rivenius. By about 10 ducts, it drains inside the oral cavity. Submandibular gland, it is present just below inner ramus of the mandible and it is a mixed type of the gland. So it secretes both mucus as well as the serous type of the salivary secretion. It drains in mouth by ducts of Barton. Histology of salivary glands. The base unit of the salivary gland, it is a salivum. A salivum, it contains acinus, both the serous as well as the mucous type of the acinus, striated type of the duct and intercalated ducts. So all these three together they are known as salivum. Acinus. Acinus is a sac-like structure containing pyramidal and myoepithelial cells. There are two types of the acinus present, serous type of the acinus as well as the mucous type of the acinus. Serous cells they contain endoplasmic reticulum and zymogen granules, and serous cells secrete digestive enzymes and saliva which is rich in water and electrolytes. Mucous cell contain mucin droplets and secretes mucin. Secretion of the acinus, it is known as primary secretion and its composition is similar to plasma. Intercalated ducts and striated ducts, they are lined by the cuboidal cells and they modify the primary secretion of acinus and it determines the final composition of saliva. Innervation of the salivary glands. Salivary glands they are innervated by autonomic nervous system. Both sympathetic as well as the parasympathetic division they innervate salivary glands. Here we can see the parasympathetic innervation of the parotid gland. So from the inferior salivary nucleus, glossopharyngeal nerve preganglionic fiber arises and they end in the otic ganglion. Postganglionic fibers they are short and they supply parotid gland. Innervation of sublingual gland and submandibular gland, it is by the facial nerve. So preganglionic fibers they arise from superior salivary nucleus and they end in the submandibular ganglion. Short postganglionic parasympathetic fibers they supply submandibular gland and sublingual gland. So glossopharyngeal nerve it supplies parotid gland and facial nerve it supplies submandibular gland and sublingual gland. Sympathetic supply to salivary glands is from T1 and T2 segment of the spinal cord and from there preganglionic fibers they end in the superior cervical ganglion. From that postganglionic fibers they innervate submandibular and sublingual salivary gland. Taste fibers from posterior 1/3 of the tongue they pass via 9 cranial nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve to end in the inferior salivary nucleus, and taste fiber from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue pass through the facial nerve and they end in the superior salivary nucleus. And from the inferior and superior salivary nucleus, parasympathetic nerve supply, it supplies to parotid gland as well as the submandibular and sublingual glands. Therefore, efferent impulses from the mouth, it reflexly excite salivary secretion from the salivary glands. So various stimuli like sight, taste of food, smell of the food, or presence of the food in mouth, irritation of the buccal mucosa, chewing of the food, these are all the stimulus. Through the higher center, it produces stimulation of the inferior and superior salivary nuclei. So through the glossopharyngeal nerve and from the facial nerve, it activates parasympathetic supply through the otic ganglion and submandibular ganglion and increases activity of the parotid gland and submandibular gland, and in this manner it increases salivary secretion which is rich in enzyme and mucin due to both acinar stimulation and vasodilatation. The rate of salivary secretion in human is about 50 ml per minute per 100 gram of the salivary tissue, and blood flow to the salivary gland is about 10 times the blood flow to that of the active skeletal muscles. Stimulation of the parasympathetic nerve to salivary gland increases blood flow, and sympathetic stimulation produces vasoconstriction and it decreases blood flow, and decrease in the blood flow decreases salivary secretion, and increase in the blood flow by the parasympathetic system, it increases salivary secretion whenever parasympathetic activity increases. Daily secretion of saliva is 1 to 1.5 liter and pH of saliva is 6 to 7.4. So orexigenic stimulus like sight of food, smell of food, or even thought of the food, it causes immediate and profuse salivary secretion. Now we will look at the composition of saliva. So saliva, it contains 99.5% of water and only small amount of the solids, that is 0.5% of the total saliva. The solids, they are of two types, organic and inorganic. So the organic solids, they are the digestive enzymes like ptylin, it is also known as salivary amylase, various lysozymes that are bactericidal in their actions, proteolytic enzymes like kallikrein, and lingual lipase which is produced by Ebner's gland which is present on the dorsum aspect of tongue. Secretion of mucin and IgA which is the first immunological defense against invading viruses and bacteria. So these are the organic solids, various digestive enzymes, mucin and IgA. Inorganic solids or various electrolytes, these are the cations and anions. Cations, they are the sodium and potassium. Anions like chloride and bicarbonates. We can see here the concentration in the plasma and the concentration inside the saliva. So concentration of sodium and chloride, they are less than the concentration in the plasma. Concentration of the potassium in the saliva is higher than the concentration inside the plasma. Here we can see the structure of the saliva which contain acinar cells, and these are the various duct cells. Duct cells, they contain both type of the duct, intercalated duct as well as a striated duct which is lined by the cuboidal cells. So acinar cells, inside the cavity of the acina, it secretes the primary secretion. Primary secretion, it contains various digestive enzymes, water and electrolytes. Digestive enzymes like amylase. So concentration of the amylase is more in the primary secretion. The enzyme is produced and stored in the zymogen granules. The electrolytes secreted from the epithelial cells of the acinar cells are sodium, potassium, bicarbonate and chloride. So they are secreted in the cavity of the acinar cells and then it passes through duct cells where it is modified. Primary secretion from the acinar cells, it passes through the various ductal cells where it is modified or final secretion is produced. This is because of the reabsorption of the sodium and chloride in the ductal cells as well as the secretion of the bicarbonate and the potassium. The ducts do not change the volume of the saliva, only modify the composition of the primary secretion. Now, because of the reabsorption of the sodium and chloride in the saliva, concentration of the sodium and chloride are less, and because of the secretion of the bicarbonate and potassium, concentration of potassium is more in saliva. Some important point to remember: saliva is always hypotonic to plasma. So tonicity of the saliva is 70% that of plasma. Because the concentration of the sodium and chloride is lower in saliva than plasma because of the reabsorption of the sodium and chloride in the ductal cells. pH of the saliva is less than 7 during resting state, and during the active secretion it is more than 8. And the concentration of the potassium in saliva is always greater than that of the plasma, but with increase in the flow rate, potassium concentration decreases because of the less time available in the ductal cell for the secretion of the potassium. Functions of saliva. So saliva, it contains various components, and depending on components we can describe the function of the saliva, like the digestive enzyme salivary amylase, which is also known as ptyalin. Salivary amylase, it reduces starch to oligosaccharides molecules, and action of the salivary amylase, it is maximum at pH of 6.8. When food bolus enters inside the stomach, pH is always less than 4. At this pH, salivary amylase is inactivated and it can no longer perform its function. Saliva keeps mouth clean and therefore it prevents oral infection. Saliva contains lysozyme, which is antibacterial. Saliva contains IgA, which provides local immunity, and it contains lactoferrin, which is bacteriostatic. In this manner, saliva provides protection in oral cavity. Saliva keeps mouth cavity and tongue moist, which facilitates speech. Saliva increases taste of food because it acts as a solvent for various chemicals present in food. Taste is perceived by the taste buds present in the tongue. Saliva helps in mastication and the swallowing process. Because of the lubricant property of the saliva, it is because of the presence of the mucin in saliva. Proline-rich protein in the saliva, it protects enamel of the teeth and thus provides them strength. Proline also binds with tannin and it reduces its toxicity. Saliva also prevents injury to the buccal mucosa by diluting the hot and irritant food materials. And saliva excretes certain heavy metals, thiocyanates, and morphine from the body. Control of salivary secretion, it describes various factors that can increase or decrease salivary production. Now, first of all, salivary production and secretion increases by activation of the parasympathetic system. By food in mouth, this is unconditioned reflex. So presence of the food in mouth, it activates parasympathetic system and it can increase salivary secretion. Sight of food, smell of food, and even thought of food, it can increase parasympathetic system activity and it can increase salivary secretion. Nausea, it can also increase salivary secretion. Salivary production decreases by inhibition of the parasympathetic system. So during sleep, in the patient with the dehydration, salivary secretion decreases. During emotions like fear, salivary secretion decreases. By giving various anticholinergic drugs, for example atropine, it can also inhibit parasympathetic activity and it can decrease salivary production. So increase in the parasympathetic activity increases salivary secretion and decrease in the parasympathetic activity decreases salivary secretion. Various applied aspects related to salivary secretion. Xerostomia or aptylism. It is the consistent decrease in the production of the saliva because of the presence of the anxiety, fear, dehydration. These are all the causes of the decrease in the production of the saliva. Because of the blockage of the salivary duct, salivary production and secretion decreases and it can produce xerostomia or aptylism. Sialorrhea is the increase in the salivary secretion and it occurs during pregnancy in the patients with the Parkinsonism, During neoplasms as well as in the patient with the schizophrenia, sialorrhea is commonly observed. Sialolithiasis is the formation of the stone in the salivary duct. It can block the salivary duct and it can produce xerostomia. MCQs for self-assessment. Ptylin is secreted by obviously the salivary gland. Lingual lipase is secreted by Ebner gland, which is present on the dorsum of tongue. Maximum potassium concentration is seen in. So the maximum potassium secretion is present in saliva and highest amount of the potassium concentration it is present in the colonic secretion. So here answer is saliva.